episode 2 of this series. If you missed the first video, I'll put a link in the description down below. I'm just having my cup of tea here now in my Craft Hockeyville mug. And we're just going to go straight into this video. In my previous video, as I mentioned, it was pretty much my parents were on the verge of divorce. My father and my biological grandparents had us go up with him in another province. My mother had no idea. She was in the hospital at the time, dealing with some mental health stuff. She finds out, threatens to contact the authorities that we were kidnapped. So he sends us back in a panic, and instead of coming home to our dream home, our two-story dream home, we end up at my mother's parents' house, who I didn't really know. There was a playground that was like across the road from them, but it was like the rustiest playground. The slide was extremely rusty, the swing set. And where we lived prior, it was a small knit community, but it was where all my cherished memories were to another small community that seemed worse than the situation we were just in. And I was like, oh my goodness. But I was quite small, and I was just rolling with the punches at this point because I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't know if my dad was coming back, what was happening with my mother. It was just chaos ensued. But anyway, after, I guess, a few weeks, few days, I don't even know how long it was. I just know we eventually up and left my grandparents, and then we went to my mother's brother's house, my uncle's house, where my aunt was too, and my cousins. And I didn't mind that. One of my first memories, actually, when we went to live with them, they had those mine games that were made out of the metal, and you had to like get the hoop out from the other hoop, those type of things that they had on their coffee table that I liked to pick at and found that interesting. My aunt, she was so nice. Both my cousins were really nice. I didn't mind it. It was a good situation, I guess, because it took my mind off of everything else that was happening. So it was good. They lived in a nice little townhouse. It was connected to another house. It was those type of houses. It was like row housing. But honestly, it was a squishy situation, very squishy situation. But I didn't mind it. And I was almost taking this all as just like one big trip. Pretty much I was seeing all my mom's family, and I haven't seen them ever before. Before this, I don't recall any memories with them. So to me, it was like this trip to see all my mom's family. Then I remember it was, I'm guessing late because it was dark out. I don't know what time it was or what. I remember a police officer showing up at my uncle's house and my aunt's house. And I just remember the officer, he was extremely nice. Like, he was really nice, I gotta say. But I was confused because I remember he placed my mother in the police car, and then he placed us in the police car, and I was like, what is going on? Like, why are we leaving my uncle's? I remember I had to have my bag packed and everything. It was extremely confusing. And next thing I know, we're leaving my uncle's, and we show up at this building, and I was like asleep. So it must have been half late because I remember through the ride, I did fall asleep. I remember there was a blanket on me, and the blanket got removed, and we showed up at this building. I was like, what is this? What is this place? I was so confused. Apparently the story goes, if there's truth behind it, I don't know. There's two sides to every story, but I just remember my mother saying that my uncle called the police to bring us to this shelter, and I was so confused. That's all I remember through all my young childhood, is just being very confused and just overwhelmed a bit too of the whole situation. But when we show up at this building, I remember this lady coming out, greeting us, and then we're going into the shelter. We end up in an office, and she's there talking and going on and on. I'm so tired and exhausted, just overwhelmed. And the whole being in the back of a cop car was like, I don't even know. My head was still kind of like, what is going on? And I just remember like, what, like, my life is just crashing and burning right now, and my siblings' life is crashing and burning, and my mother's life is crashing and burning, and it's like, what is going on? This is such a mess. And I just remember the only real big memory of this shelter I remember were one of the first things given to me there. I remember cheese and crackers, which I was kind of like, really? And I remember eating that cheese and crackers in a room. It was like a board type room, and there was a TV, and we watched something on it, some type of like family matters type situation video, and the importance of, like, I don't know, some video that was full of CRAP that I was just like, whatever, because I was young and it seemed almost too advanced, I guess, and older for me to really understand and grasp what was going on. So I was just there eating my cheese and crackers. Then there was this lady, and she was just there steady talking and going on, and I was just like, okay, not really taking any of it in. Honestly, at that point, it was like anyone talking to me, I just started shutting out. And that was my first real moment and my first memory of really remembering starting to really close people out and become distant and shutting people out and just not hearing anyone's stuff anymore, because I was like, okay, things are changing every other week now, every other day. With this whole family dynamic situation, you're gonna probably be here tomorrow and gone the next day, so whatever you gotta say, missus, I'm just not even gonna listen to you. And honestly, I can say this, I never listened to a word anyone there really said. I can't even recall or tell you. But I remember there was another lady there that my mom was starting to become kind of like friends with, who was also in this shelter, and it was just like, I don't know, I felt like we were kind of just then pushed to the wayside. And it was just, I do remember getting, I don't know who gave it to me, how I got it, but I remember having those Tamagotchis. I'll put up if you don't know what I'm talking about. But I remember having one of those and playing with it in the shelter. I do remember that. I remember they had this little tiny yard area outside of the shelter that had the old, like, little plastic toys, you know, like the little kid slides that were plastic and stuff. But I don't ever recall actually going out there. And it was just a lot of corridors, cold floors, cold walls. It was just a very cold atmosphere. If I could recall and tell you how I felt being in a shelter, it felt cold, and just the first time, like I said, I felt me start to shut down and shut people out, and the first time I actually felt myself start to feel not happy. I remember, like, it was like the first moment I realized this isn't a vacation anymore. This isn't just me and meeting my mom's side of the family and everything being hip hip hooray. Things are changing and happening in my life that I can't control, that I can't change, and I just have to take it, ride with it, and go with it. I'm too young to really do anything, and the few people I did have left, like my mother and my siblings that were along for this ride as well, that's all I had. And I was clung to it, but I wasn't. I was in this weird dynamic and weird space mentally where I kind of told myself, well, they can go any day too, so I'm not going to let them in. And that's when I really, like I said earlier, just started to distance myself from anybody around me and just starting to shut down a bit. But it was definitely not the greatest, and that's where I finally, because even when we were with my mother's parents, my grandparents, I didn't even start school then. Biological father and biological grandparents hauled me out of school to fly up with him where I didn't attend school. I then flew back here, went with my mother and her parents, still not attending school, and finally showing up at this shelter where I had to attend school, which, no joke, like, I'm not even kidding. This school reminded me, okay, you know the school in Matilda? That's what this school reminded me of, okay? Like, it was, I don't even know. And I went from this school that was kind of like, I don't know, it was a cute, quaint little school where I went to kindergarten, to this pretty grand, because we were in the city now. Once we left my grandparents' house, that were my mom's parents, and we went to my uncle's, they lived in the city, and then we were at the shelter, which was also in the city. So we went from this small town to the city in a shelter to now this school that was really big and brick-like and cold. So it totally matched the shelter, because that was cold and just dreary and depressing, and everybody there, I just remember, was really depressing. And it was just I don't know, it was like, if I had to say a situation in my lifetime I never want to go back to, it's not my parents' divorce, it's not my family dynamic situation, it's that shelter. I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. And I know they're there to help and this, that, and the other thing, and I get that, and we were kids, and it was there to help my mother and us kids, but at the same time, like, if you have anyone in your family or friends you can reach out to, I would do that first before going to one of these places. And it's always been a fear of mine, and I even mentioned this to my husband one time before. It has honestly been a little fear. It's not a big fear, but it is one of those little fears in the back of your mind that kind of sit there. I never want to go back to or ever happen again in my lifetime, because it was just a negative, dark time in my life that I absolutely hated as a child and hated the fact that it happened. But yeah, so this school, now it must have been during the fall time, because I remember going outside the school and I was sitting down. I was like sitting in leaves, and I was just picking and playing with leaves, and it had these underground tunnels. I know, like, but it did. And it was very dark and dreary. The lighting down there was very dark and dreary, but that's how you would get to the gym. You'd have to go through these tunnels. But I remember there was one time, and we weren't at this school very long. We weren't in this shelter situation for very long. But when I did attend this school, I remember I got in trouble, because this was still, I don't know if some of you had this when you were going to school. It was still the nuns pretty much in charge of running the school. It was very Catholic. But I remember they had a prayer that was up on the wall, and you had to read the prayer that was on the wall. And that would happen every single morning. And I remember I couldn't read. So I was there just staring at it and looking at it, and everybody else was there reading it word for word in the class, but I couldn't. And I remember, because I wasn't doing it, I got in trouble. So I got sent down. I had to take an elevator and go down to the tunnels, and I had to sit in the tunnel against this cold concrete wall, and it was all gray with these dreary lights, and I had to sit there. And the teacher then left and went back up to her classroom while I was down there for a time out, because I didn't do the prayer in the morning. So I remember just sitting there, and I started to cry, and I got frustrated, and I just remember getting angry and upset and just mad, and just, it felt like the world was crashing, and I was just sick of it. And but no, that's pretty much the only memories though I have of that school. I just remember it was attached to that shelter type situation. Now, they weren't like attached physically, but they were really next door to each other. I literally would walk from, the school was here, and then the shelter was here. You could just, it was down the road, and we'd have to walk back and forth there. But I remember at that moment, I was like, I'm so sick of everything right now. So sick of everything. All right, so yeah, that is pretty much my experience in a shelter. And I just remember my mother always saying to us, she didn't want us in that shelter to spend Christmas in. But no, and the thing was too, I don't ever remember the shelter being overly crowded. I know that's one thing people are always curious about when it comes to shelters. Were they, are they very like claustrophobic and crowded? But what I can recall, it wasn't. It just felt empty and cold and lonely and just depressing. Because the one person I do remember, and I think I know her name, but I can't really recall, so I don't want to, and like I said, any names I want to keep private. But I kind of remember her, but kind of don't. The one who was like, I guess, starting to become friends with my mother. And I don't know, she just rubbed me the wrong way. I just remember getting a bad vibe. But I do remember there was one day where she actually, like, she left. And she wasn't at the shelter anymore. I think she wrote my mom a letter or something, like, saying how she was, like, released from the shelter, or not released, but left the shelter. And then I was like, oh, just another person who came and gone. That's all it seemed like to me. But yeah, so that's my experience with living in a shelter. I don't really remember the food. I just remember one of the first things they gave me. Like I said, we were watching one of those videos about like family dynamics and and all this whatever, which, like I said, as a kid going in that situation, you really do. And this is honestly just my point of view, but me personally, I just started to tune everything out and shut everything out and everyone out, just because I was just getting so sick of everything steady, just feeling like it was changing over and over and over again. But yeah, so my mother says about not staying in that shelter for Christmas and this, that, and the other thing. And then the other person that she was close to in there ended up leaving. And I guess, like, I don't know, just had enough of the whole shelter lifestyle, if that's what you want to call it. So then the next place we end up in is my mother ends up moving into this house in a town very close to the city. We move in with this guy, and I remember sitting at this little kitchen table, and the kitchen was literally like yay big. It was a very, very small kitchen, and the table was here, and like everything was on top of you. But I remember the living room was pretty big, and there was a bedroom, this, that, and the other thing. But anyway, I remember we were there. I don't know how long we were there, but there was this guy that was there, and he was just, and I could use words. He wasn't a very nice guy. But I remember we were playing with cardboard boxes or something, and he got really upset about it. And the house was just, I don't know, it just smelled weird. I remember that there was a weird smell to the house. And I don't know how long we were there for. The only real weird memory I have is I had a hamburger for the first time, and it made me really sick. And that's when I had my first and my last hamburger. Never have I even touched it. If you ask me now, have I? No. They make me really, really sick. I don't like burgers at all. Like, But it's weird because I can eat ground beef, but I just, whatever it is, I guess that experience of a hamburger and how sick, and I mean, I got very sick off that hamburger. So it could have been food poisoning because it was takeout, but who knows? It turned me from ever having a hamburger again. But that's pretty much it. I remember, like I said, playing with boxes and making things out of the boxes, the moving boxes. This guy who was a complete, if you can mouth read what I said, because I like to try to keep this for all ages, even though the Dear Diary series I find is more directed towards an older audience, but who knows. But anyway, he was that. He wasn't a very nice person. My mom was, I think, dating him. I'm pretty sure. Just the way the dynamic of everything during that time, I'm pretty sure she was dating him. But yeah, like I said, we left that shelter, and then she ended up there. And then something went down, because I remember he got mad, this guy did, for some reason, and we told my mother about it. And next thing I know, then we're leaving there. It could have been to that situation of us telling her that he got mad at us. I don't know. Was there other stuff and that's why we left? I don't know. I can't tell you. I don't. I'm not her, so I can't say. But we did then leave, and we ended up in an apartment complex building. And I remember I was on a mattress in this apartment complex. And yeah, we moved again. And I started to attend another school. And when we were living with this guy, I can't recall if I was in school or not. I think I was, yes. Maybe. I think I was in school. I just know I did attend another school, whether it was when we were in that house with that buddy or if it was when I ended up in the apartment complex. But I did attend another school then. And this is, I'm still in grade 1 at this point in time. And still can't read. And then I remember this teacher was, not that she didn't really care, it's just nothing with her soaked in. I can't even tell you anything I did learn when in that class. If I still couldn't read, I know that when at the end of it. But we were in the apartment complex and I was attending this school, and I remember that's where I first learned like how to play Down by the Banks for the Hanky Panky and those type of things. I remember sitting down and it was a fenced in play yard, and it was my first time like really interacting with kids my age, because even when I was at the Matilda school, as I call it, I didn't really talk to anyone then or want to get close to anyone. That was the first time I remember sitting down and doing those type of games with other kids and kind of interacting with other kids. I wouldn't let them in, I wouldn't get close to them, and I wasn't becoming friends with any of them. I remember talking to some of them, but it was never like, you want to hang out or you want to come over to my, nothing like that. I still was very closed off, didn't want to meet any friends. But it was the first time I felt like back in a school situation where I felt kind of comfortable. But the teacher, like I said, she wasn't really doing anything to help me, which is really disheartening because I feel like there was a lot of people then, I don't want to point fingers, but I feel like a lot of people when I was a kid failed. And that's why I was in the situation I ended up being in with not being able to read and stuff. In these apartment complexes, I remember we were near the very end and it was very close to a playground, and I just liked going out there. Whatever it was, I just always wanted to be out in the playground. It wasn't a big playground now, but that's where I'd always like to spend my time. And then inside, I remember it was just very squishy, very squishy apartment. But no, that's where we ended up then next. And I think this is where I'm gonna end off this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, but mostly this was, like I said, my situation and experience in a shelter as a child, and it wasn't a terrible one, but it wasn't a great one. I respect what they do for people in bad situations. Could they have done more? In my opinion, yes. There was a lot more they could have done, especially for children who end up in a shelter. They could have, I don't know, because the vibe they left and the vibe they gave me was simply a very uncomfortable one. A fear of shelters. I don't know. The overall, my perception of it now is negative. And like I said, I have a fear of it now. Just everything. I just don't like it. I don't like thinking about it. I don't like the vibe of them. Anyone who even just says about it. And like I said, I do appreciate they help people. But this shelter in particular, I guess, yes, they put a roof over our head. But at the same time, for children, they did nothing. And here it was a shelter for specifically women and children. And for me personally as a child, I don't feel like they've done anything. But that's just my personal opinion, my personal experience. And that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll continue on in the next one. Where did I go from the apartment complex then? Because I'm after moving. Okay, so I was at my original house with my two parents. Divorce is still ongoing, by the way. It's still happening. It's official now. It's in the works. The divorce is officially in the works now. So I left that house. My mother ended up in hospital, Nana Pops. So I don't know if you really count that or not, because that's where I would stay a lot of the time anyway. I'll include it, but when she ended up in hospital, Nana Pops. Then I ended up in another province with my biological dad, so I was up there. Then I came back and I was with my Nana Pop on my mom's side. So Nana Pop on dad's side, Nana Pop on mom's side. Then we ended up coming into town and living with my uncle and my aunt. Then I ended up leaving there and going to the shelter. And then I ended up at the apartment complex. So we're at, no, the boyfriend's house. Well, then the apartment complex. So I'm already at 8 places I lived by the age of 6. And that's not even the end of it. More to come. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this helped someone. Hopefully you don't mind hearing, I guess, my story, my childhood, my experience in shelter. Like I said, sadly it was a negative one. It wasn't a positive one. I know there's people out there who have had positive experiences with shelters. Personally, sadly, I didn't. It was just a negative one. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. My foot's gonna sleep. My foot's gonna sleep.